Hello, everyone. My name is Sarah Iris Fox, and I want to extend a warm welcome to the Rough Edges podcast. Rough Edges exists to provide mental health education as well as faith-based messages in order to inspire growth and foster healing. In this podcast, I will guide you through my faith and mental health journey to dispel the stigma surrounding mental illness and to create a voice for those who wish to discover more about these topics. My hope is that this podcast will not only shed light on mental health issues, but will also reveal the intersection between faith and mental illness in order to bring growth and healing in our communities. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Rough Edges. Today, I am joined by a very special guest. Her name is Shannon Petrovich. Shannon Petrovich is a therapist, author, and a YouTube creator. Shannon earned her bachelor's degree from Bowdoin College and her master's in social work from the University of Connecticut. She earned her clinical licenses in social work and substance abuse counseling and is a board certified diplomate in clinical social work. Her new book, Out of the Fog, Into the Clear, Journaling to Help You Heal from Toxic Relationships, has attained Amazon bestseller status in self-help for abuse, codependency, and personal transformation. On her YouTube channel, which is called Therapist Talks, she shares insights, information, perspectives, and strategies on a wide range of relationship and mental health topics. With a very trauma-informed, strengths-based approach, she seeks to help people who see the old stories that are in their way and to fully become the person they were created to be. Welcome, Shannon.
Thanks so much, Sarah. It's wonderful to be here.
Yeah, it's awesome to have you here. And so, Shannon, I would love to get to know you a little bit better. So, what are three things that you absolutely cannot live without and why?
Well, of course, God comes first, and that's, an absolute in my life. And then my husband is amazing, and has been an incredible support and my best friend and such a blessing in my life. And then we have sort of a menagerie of kids and stepkids and grandkids that are absolutely our passion. So those are, I think, my three things.
Wow, I really love that. And I love how you covered just like the three core elements of like all the relationships that you have. Like you have family, friends, and you also have God, which is number one. So I really resonate with all of those things.
Awesome.
Yeah, so Shannon, you are a licensed clinical therapist. And so what made you want to become a therapist?
It's been an interesting journey. I think that originally, when I was a kid, I always wanted to be a veterinarian or a doctor. And then I realized in college and then later in grad school, or it drove me to grad school, that I was more intrigued by what makes people sort of tick and how relationships work. And I always felt like I was making it up and flying blind and was very confused as a late adolescent and early adult. And I just felt like I wanted to know. And back in that day, you really didn't have a lot of information about mental health unless you went to grad school and learned it from the professionals. So I found this wonderful program through the University of Connecticut, and the professors were incredible. And I really just became passionate about understanding human interactions and relationships and our relationships within ourselves as well as with others. And that's just become my life's mission.
Yeah, I really like that. And I love how you just took an interest in things that you genuinely wanted to find out more information about. Because a lot of the times it's like when people are, at least for me, when I'm like dead set on a certain career, I'm thinking, oh, I can never veer off and venture into different things. And it's just like, no, you can, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I really like that.
Yeah, I was a little uncomfortable in that transition and I wasn't sure what to do. And then I just kept kind of coming back to that intrigue. And then I opened up the newspaper looking at work, and I had been volunteering at a domestic violence shelter actually, and working with the kids in particular, and helping the kids. And I felt like I really wanted to understand better how to help the kids and how to help the women that we were working with as well, because it felt like
Mm.
we were really coming up short in a lot of ways. But then I opened up the newspaper and circled everything that sounded interesting as a job, and every one of them said MSW required. And I said, well, I got better figure out what this thing is. I want one. so, so I found this program and jumped right in both feet.
Wow, I really love that. I also love the curiosity behind it too, where it's like, okay, what's a better way to help? So it's so good because it ties right into your passion, but it also just, helps you to gain the information that you were seeking. So I really love that.
Yeah.
And so you are an Amazon best-selling author or best-selling author, period. So I want to know, what is the most satisfying aspect of being an author?
Well, I was a reluctant author, to be honest. I jumped into YouTube 4 years ago because that seemed to be where I could share some of the strategies and information and insights that I'd gained with more people in the world than just one person, 1 hour at a time. And YouTube really seemed to be just where everybody was hanging. So I did that. And then the focus really became on toxic relationships and narcissism and things like that. And what I realized over the last year was that I needed to bring it all together because sharing 10-minute videos wasn't really helping people get through the healing part. And there are just millions of people in the world who are never going to have access to a therapist. So I
Mm,
put together a book that that puts together the information and insights and perspectives, and also a bunch of journal prompts at each sort of stage of the healing process, so that a person can walk it through themselves. They can walk it through with a therapist if they have one, but they can also walk it through with a best friend or a family member, or even within themselves if that's really all they have. And it helps people to clarify what's real and what's the trauma bond, and get things kind of straightened out in their minds so that they can make a wise decision and move forward.
yeah, I really love the aspect of the journaling prompts because in that way it doesn't like solely feel like a workbook, but it actually feels like a internal transformation going on, and it's also your personal thoughts, and it's just, something to prompt you to actually think about, your inner well-being in terms of like, either getting out of toxic relationships or avoiding them altogether. So I really appreciate that.
Yeah, and the starting point is really to assess and come to terms with the toxic relationship you might have within your own head, because most of us do. Most of us are
Mhm.
our own worst enemies. We're very harsh with ourselves. We're very hard on ourselves. And we have to look at that first and foremost, or we can tend to be more accepting of toxicity from other people. So if I
Mm.
really clear out that part in myself, and I am, being more compassionate and loving and boundaried within my own self, and I really have a positive and solid sense of self, then I can stand up for myself better with other people in my life.
Right. And that is so important. And I love that you brought up that it stems from, the relationship that you have with yourself. Because if you don't have a strong sense of self worth or even like, self love, you're not going to know what you need in a relationship or even how to voice your concerns, especially when you're dealing with toxicity in a relationship. And so I thank you for bringing that up as well.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of us tend to, especially we as women, tend a lot to do a lot of placating, a lot of peacekeeping and people pleasing. I call it the three Ps. And in
Mhm.
all of that, we are walking on eggshells around our loved ones or our relationships, and we're not owning our truth. And I
Mm.
think it's in the book of James that we need to tell the truth in love. And it doesn't say tell fibs and dance around the truth in love. It says tell the truth in love. And so that's the only thing that gives our relationships really the reality, and the boundaries to see if they can grow and flourish, or to see if they really are completely toxic and unhealthy for us. So I think it's really important first to address that within yourself, and then to begin to stop the three P's, and stop undermining yourself, and start setting boundaries with people, so that if somebody is toxic, that you're giving them what I call a grown-up timeout. Whether you're hanging up the phone or leaving the house, or saying, I'll talk to you later when you calm down, or when you're not going to be rude and mean. And then you can actually see whether that person wants to change or not, and whether you can resolve and repair the relationship, or whether it's truly toxic and abusive and you have to get out.
Right. Yeah, I agree. And so we are talking about in this season of Rough Edges, we're talking about mental health and the relationships. So, what would you say are the fundamental characteristics of a good relationship?
Yeah, a good relationship, a healthy relationship, is two whole, authentic people coming together to share love and to be loving towards each other. And love is a
Mm,
verb. In our culture, we tend to think of love as an ooey gooey feeling that you either feel or you don't feel, and when you don't feel it, then you don't have to be loving, and that's just not true. Love is a
right.
verb, and love is action. And when we have a solid and complete sense of self, then we can come to a relationship with our whole authentic selves and share love with another. Unhealthy relationships are when one person is typically extremely self centered, extremely um, using the other person. They basically believe and feel that they matter, that their thoughts, feelings, needs, wants, moods, emotions matter, and yours don't. And that's the big difference. So um, if you think about whether you feel like your whole self is respected and honored and known and loved in that relationship, or you feel like you're just there to supply the other person with adoration and placation, and taking care of them and their every mood and emotion and want and need and thought and feeling, then you're in a toxic relationship, because they're basically sucking the life out of you, and you are, over time you become really bankrupted emotionally, spiritually, physically, and even financially.
Mm, wow. Yeah, and that's also the reality of like, people wanting to be givers instead of, allowing someone else to, fill them up as well, cuz you can't give from an empty cup. So it's like it's reciprocal. You have to have someone you want to care for and love, but they also equally have to care for and love you as well. And I really love something that you touched on in terms of like um being bankrupt in terms of like emotionally, spiritually, mentally, like you're just physically also exhausted, especially when you are giving everything and the other person is just not reciprocating that, or not giving at the same level as you may have been giving, from the beginning. So I really appreciate that you highlighted like it's really a dangerous thing to be in this type of relationship.
It really is. And when people get out, I think they're kind of blown away by how empty they feel. And oftentimes
Mm,
that puts them at risk for running back in to the relationship.
mm,
And it's so important to recognize that that feeling is real and it's normal. And it's even healthy to recognize the emptiness that you are left with in the wake of that relationship, because a healthy, normal relationship doesn't feel that way. So it's really important to do the work to rebuild your sense of self and to rebuild your connections with other people, because this person's probably isolated you from your people. That's part of the control and manipulation, that they want to isolate you and make you feel like it's you and them against the world, and nobody else loves you or cares about you like I do, but you're not very lovable anyway. But I do. It's sort of this twisted gaslighting, and so you tend to feel really, really bereft and despairing and really empty. So then you also have to rebuild your entire life. Like, a lot of people will say, I don't know what I think. I don't know what I feel.
Mm,
I don't know what I want. I don't have any dreams left. I just don't know what to do with myself. And that's a real feeling. And so in my work, I really want people to know that's normal and that's healthy. And you have to walk it through and
mm.
refill and rebuild and recover. The last several chapters of my book are really all about rebuilding, because there's that emptiness that puts you so at risk for going back or for finding another relationship that does the exact same thing.
Right, right. That's very true. So, since we were talking about, you kind of touched on a little bit about this, but how does a relationship become toxic?
Usually it starts that way. Sometimes, people can be on their best behavior in the beginning. And so, but if you really have your creepometer on board, that's a funny concept, but I did a video a couple of years ago called "How to Develop a Trustworthy Creepometer," and the one thing that will disable it every time. And so that our creepometer is our wise mind, keeping that on board and keeping that alert and oriented when you're first meeting somebody, and you want to watch their behavior, not their words. Talk is cheap.
Mm,
And people can say, I'm the nicest person you'll ever want to meet. I'm loyal. I'm this, I'm that. I'm compassionate. I'm empathic. But when you watch their behavior and you watch their actions and you listen to what they're saying about other people, and what they've learned from past relationships, or when they laugh at other people's pain, or when they're rude and mean to the people waiting on you. I mean, it's just all around you if you keep your antenna up and your creepometer sharp. And you also watch what happens when the person is sad or upset or disappointed or frustrated or makes a mistake or feels hurt or anything, because you can you can kind of keep on that facade some of the time, but when things go south, typically people will show their true colors. And so that's when you really want to be stepping back and watching and taking notes and noticing everything that you're noticing, so that you see, does this person really come from an authentic place, and are they really a loving, compassionate, caring, empathic person, or are they completely self-centered, vengeful, mean-spirited, all of those kinds of things. And then the one thing that will derail your creepometer is getting intimate too soon. And so I really strongly encourage people to take your time, you know, do it God's way. There's no,
mhm,
when you rush into intimacy, you are attaching yourself powerfully to a person, and you may not really know them
mm,
that well. And I always say to my clients, if you don't know them well enough to hand them your car keys, your house keys, and the PIN number to your bank account, you do not know them well enough to be intimate. Plain
right.
and simple. Like, you're handing over your body, but you don't know them well enough to hand over all of that. So, it's just a really weird part of our culture that people are too intimate too quickly, and then your rational mind goes offline, and you start
Mm,
to fall into their lies and their manipulations and their control, and you're not going to be thinking with your rational mind.
yeah. Wow. I got so much just in just that one answer. Like, I've learned so much, especially like the creepometer. Like, I need to formulate one like ASAP. Like it seems like such a reliable tool. And another thing that you mentioned, the danger of being too intimate too fast. That's something that's really, I mean, it's kind of difficult to avoid because, especially when you feel like you're emotionally attached to this person, especially if you're in like a already like established codependent relationship. So it's a little bit, tricky to kind of, make sure that you don't get intimate a little too quickly. So, just a follow up question, like, what are some steps that somebody can take to just guard their hearts and make sure that they don't get too intimate too quickly?
I think you can start right off in the very beginning being, again, telling the truth in love. So instead of being all about what they want, when they want it, how they want it, and everything, if you take a beat and take a step back and say, yeah, I'd really love to get together again, but my week is really busy and maybe next week. Even taking a beat with somebody who's kind of coming in hot and really love bombing you and not loving, they will
Mm,
be offended by that. They'll be upset about that. They'll have a little mini tantrum. They'll be pouty, and they will expect you to kind of come running and placate them. And so I think it's really important right in the beginning to set boundaries for yourself so that you don't get sort of bulldozed in. And a lot of people think, well, if I kind of cool things off a little bit, then he's going to lose interest or she's going to lose interest or whatever. And
mm,
that's going to, ruin the relationship or put me in the friend zone or something like that. Well, if that happens, you dodged a bullet because
mm,
somebody who genuinely is interested in you and genuinely cares about you will be genuinely caring about your needs and wants and feelings.
right.
And that is what matters. And so, if you have a good solid sense of self and you are boundaried about stuff right in the beginning, you are going to dodge those bullets. If you are going in doing the people pleasing thing hardcore, you are likely to get sucked into something that may not be healthy.
Okay, thank you for that because setting boundaries early is a really good skill to have, and it's kind of as speaking from being like a chronic people pleaser, I'm working on it, but it's just so like intimidating almost to kind of just say, hey, like these are my limits, and this is what I'm willing to do. This is what I'm not willing to do, and kind of just defining the relationship, doing some like DTR like very early on in the process. I think that's very helpful and something that, is necessary because as you said, like people can take advantage of, you just trying to please them or trying to, just serve their every need, and it's just like no, you can take care of yourself by setting a boundary.
Exactly. Yeah, and you're worth it. Your well-being and your mental health are worth it. And when you do that, you will feel better and you will know that you're taking care of yourself in a healthy way. And again, you do that and you step back and watch what happens. And if the person says, "Yeah, I totally respect that and I really care about you and let's get together whenever you feel up for it," then that's great. And if that person, pulls a little tantrum, then don't say, "Oh, shoot, I screwed this up." Say, "Phew, I dodged a bullet. That person was not for me." And it's just so important that we, take responsibility for what is ours and not for what isn't. And somebody else's emotions are not our our responsibility. So,
Right.
a lot of us were kind of raised to be people pleasers, and that's a really bad trap to fall into. And it's lovely and wonderful that we are so caring and compassionate, and those are great qualities, but you do have to be careful with them. I did a video a couple of years ago called "My Empathy is Killing Me." And it was all about that. Do we have to get rid of our empathy in order to learn to set boundaries? And the answer is no, absolutely not. We just have to learn to come from the inside out. So we have to take care of that um, rebuilding of our sense of self. And then we have to stand for that and stand for our truths and tell the truth in love, like I said before. And then it's all good because we don't, and a lot of people will come out of a negative relationship and say, I don't want to ever trust again, or I'm pushing myself to trust again. I say, whoa, whoa, whoa. You don't want to trust other people. You want to learn to trust yourself. So when you trust
Mm.
yourself and your creepometer is solid, then you can go into any situation and you meet somebody and you go, wow, that guy's a real, I'm not going to say it
Bleep.
on bleepity bleep, or that one's that just got, whoa, she's like super narcissistic or whatever. And when you recognize those things, you can emotionally step back. You can set those boundaries. You can not get sucked into a relationship with them, and you can even sort of, they can be acquaintances or even casual friends or whatever, but you know better than to get fully involved in a person's life who is one of those toxic people.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And that video title, My Empathy is Killing Me, that's the title of my life, actually.
Was mine too. It was mine too. Lots of burnouts and
Yeah,
lots of, yeah.
yeah, most definitely. But thank you so much for, just reminding us that we're worth it,
Mhm.
and that we owe it to ourselves to take care of ourselves and put our needs above everything else. That doesn't mean we can be selfish, but it also means that if something doesn't feel right, you know, we should defend ourselves in that way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. If something doesn't feel right, it isn't right. And if you don't feel loved in a relationship, you are not being loved, plain and simple.
Mhm.
And yet your heart might feel like you love them. And that's a really confusing thing. We haven't really talked too much about trauma bonding, but when a person comes in hot and does that love bombing and then they devalue you and then they love bomb you and then they devalue you, that back and forth cycling pulls you into a trauma bond where you start to believe that you are essentially unlovable, but this person loves you and you are their traumatic, chaotic relationship is still the most important thing in your life. So it becomes really difficult to see through that fog and get clear of that destructive relationship. So, in order to see through that fog, you have to line up the facts. You have to recognize what the truths are in that relationship and recognize that your heart is not going to be on board with this idea at all. You can decide that you have to end that relationship and you can still feel like you are totally in love with that person and
Mm,
still follow through with walking away. So it's really important to recognize that because I think a lot of times we think if I love that person, I got to keep trying. Not true.
mm,
Not true at all. If
right.
you see that this is a negative, destructive, toxic relationship and you have written out the facts and you know it, and other people are telling you that, it's important to make that good decision and walk out of that relationship emotionally and physically, and then heal your heart and refill your life and recognize that you could love and leave.
Wow. Yeah, that's a powerful message right there. Just loving someone and, loving yourself at the same time enough to leave the relationship. That doesn't mean that you like totally hate the person, but you
Right?
could still love them and leave the relationship at the same time.
Right.
So,
Absolutely.
yeah, so that brings me to conflict in terms of like, relational trauma. Um because, you mentioned trauma bonding and, a lot of the times that can get heightened like in terms of like conflict in toxic relationships. So, how does someone deal with conflict in relationships while having experienced relational trauma?
So, are you talking about having had relational trauma and then being in a healthy relationship and trying to deal with conflict?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really hard. When you've had a difficult relationship and then you have a positive relationship, it can be really challenging. And I think sometimes we will even not know how to do that to the point where we almost ruin that good relationship. So it's really important to do that healing journey. And some people will be free and clear of that person, that toxic relationship, and still have not healed. So it's really important to go through the steps and do the journaling and do the process of rebuilding so that you can have a healthy relationship on the other side. And then I think the steps are to really look at what is going on, listen deeply, um, recognize that there are different perspectives on a conflict, step back and I like to teach people to put their intensity on a 1 to 10 scale. So 10 being screaming craziness, right? And 1 being I'm totally calm. So anything from 5 to 10 is total destruction. Like you're going to say bad things, think bad things. It's all
Hmm.
destruction. Anything that happens in that conversation from 5 to 10 is just not healthy, not just productive, and more than likely very destructive. So you don't want to continue the conversation past 5. You always want to honor each other by taking a break, by saying, I think this is that we each need to kind of take a break and go think about it, pray about it, and we could talk about it a little bit later when the intensity is a little bit lower. And then go and pray about it and pray for understanding and pray to understand what the other person's perspective is, and then come back to the table really deeply listening and really trying to understand the other's perspective, because it, it with two loving, compassionate people, you're still going to have conflict. And when you can come at it from a place of, I deeply want to know what it is you're thinking and feeling. And then what's so true most of the time is that both people have sort of the same needs and wants. And
Mm.
typically, you've just been sort of ships passing in the night and not understood that you're both thinking and feeling the same thing. Typically, each person is not feeling loved enough, is not feeling like they're spending enough time together, is feeling like the other person didn't hear them. And so when you sit and listen and talk to each other and then accept what the person says, like, I didn't mean that, or that wasn't where I was coming from, and saying, okay, I hear you. And I believe that that's true. Because sometimes we'll get stuck and say, no, you really did mean that. No, you can't say that. You have to accept that what the other person is telling you is their truth, and you have to
Right.
then tell your truth, and you each have to accept that. And then it still takes a little bit of deep breathing and letting it go to move forward. But I think that then it's really important to hug it out, and if there's any place for forgiveness and um, apologizing, that's really important too.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely agree, especially with like what you said about you guys having the same needs, because a lot of the time with miscommunication it's just like you guys are trying to reach the same goal, but you're not like communicating that with each other, so
Yeah.
it's like, confusion. But yeah, it's true, like most of the times it's like we have the same needs, or we have needs that aren't being met and that are, similar to one another, but because we don't communicate, or because, we feel like, okay, you're not listening to me and you're never going to listen to me, then that's when the conflict really starts.
Right.
So thank you for expounding on that.
Yeah, and it's so interesting, often when I have a couple that I'm working with, both of them feel like they want more time together. Both of them feel lonely in the relationship. Both of them feel like they're not communicating, like you said. And once they start opening that communication, they're just blown away that they're on the same page. It's like, wait, what? It kind of washes away all the conflict, because they really want the same things, and they're just going about it by being mad at each other instead of just inviting each other back into relationship with each other.
Yeah. Yeah. That's very interesting, you know?
But it's not something we learn in school, so where are you going to pick that up? You have to.
That's true.
It's hard. It's hard, and we're all flying blind until we're not. So it's tough stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very true. And toxic relationships are really complicated. And so people have their opinions on, just cutting people off altogether, or some people think, oh, just have that line of communication open a little bit, for the future in case you guys cross paths again. And I am on the cut him off side of the spectrum, but I would like to know your opinion. Like, do you think toxic relationships can be restored? Why or why not?
That's a really good question, and it is complicated because it runs the whole gamut. And so it's really important that if there's any kind of physical abuse, that you have to cut it off and get out. When someone has the ability and willingness to go to that degree, you have to know that your life is in danger, and they
Mhm.
are not willing to let you fully exist in that relationship, literally. So if there's physical abuse, you've got to get out. If there's emotional, verbal, things like that, it can also be so toxic that you have to get out. And so you have to assess that for yourself. And what's also true is that we can be so undermining of ourselves in that relationship that we are, self destructing in that relationship. And so sometimes that dynamic is so hard to change in that relationship that we need that cutoff for a while. But we can talk about lots of different types of relationships. So if you have, some people have to co-parent with somebody who has been verbally and emotionally abusive, and some people have a parent or an adult child or a sibling or what have you. So if you have to coexist with that person, it's important to learn to emotionally step back and emotionally kind of be able to watch the games and the manipulations and the dishonesties and all of that, but not engage in it. So when you do that, that is a very healthy thing, because then you can just stick with the facts. If you have to co-parent, you have to drop the kids and pick them up and things like that, to do that without getting emotionally involved is super important. Like, it's going to be life saving for you. So it can be done. And I've definitely helped people to do that. And I know I've seen people do that. So it's really important that we realize that we can do that. And sometimes people will do that too with an adult child or a parent, and learn how to sort of not engage in all the games and manipulations, but still be involved, but just sort of coexisting in a sense, and just keeping your heart safe. Um, but it's something that you have to sort of assess for yourself. And like I said before, the boundaries, when you set a boundary with somebody and you hang up the phone when they're verbally abusive, or you walk out or leave. And then if they escalate into violence, then again that the only reason they weren't being violent was because you were in that placating mode. And now that you're no longer placating, they're off the rails and you have to leave. And that's an essential thing. But if you stop the placating and you set boundaries and they respect those boundaries, then you might have something that can be restored, or that you can, co-parent or coexist on some level. But you have to assess whether it's destroying you. And a lot of people say that, I had to get out for and not talk to them at all for 6 months or a year or whatever. And now I can kind of be in the same space and I'm okay. So you kind of have to just know you, and also get back in touch with your people, because like I said, a lot of times isolated from your people or been isolated by that person. So when you reconnect
Mm.
with your people, that gives you those reality testing folks that will say, "Ah, you look so much happier when you're not around that person," or, you being no contact with that person is so good for you, or, maybe you should see if you can be, able to do blah 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 and not really freak out over it. So it runs the whole range. With somebody with milder narcissism, it can be resolvable or repairable. Um, with more severe, absolutely not. They're not going to see that they're at fault and they're not going to change, and you are in danger.
Yeah, I agree with that, definitely. And especially I love how you framed it in terms of like the level of intensity in the toxic relationship. And I agree with you. Like if you are in a very abusive relationship and your life is threatened and in danger, then yes, you should absolutely cut all ties with that person.
Yeah.
But I love how you also gave the example of like milder cases where it could be like a co-parenting situation or like an adult child or even like another family member like a sibling. You can coexist, but you don't have to be emotionally involved with that person on the same level. So I really love that analogy as well. And it's interesting to me because I see like the common denominator in all of those is just it's okay to leave. But there are like different degrees of like leaving. Like you could leave emotionally, you could leave physically, especially if it's in a seriously abusive situation. Like you would have to remove yourself physically, but you could also be emotionally like keeping them at arm's length because you want to preserve your inner peace and your internal structure, as well as like keeping your mind and your heart at ease, especially when that person could be manipulating you or trying to just control you and overpower you. So thank you for like highlighting all those different factors, and it's really intriguing to me.
Yeah, it is confusing too. And that's why we talk about being lost in the fog, because it can be so baffling. And that's why it is so important to get sort of a perspective from other people and even from yourself, sort of your rational mind, as I talked about. So journaling that out. What are the facts? This person has done this. Um, these are the things that I really can't live with anymore. This is what happens when I set boundaries, so that you can really sort it out in a rational way. Because, like I said, your heart is just sucked in. You're not going to get truth from that. But yes, you can emotionally leave and or physically leave. And sometimes people have left the relationship years before and still emotionally ruminating about them, obsessed with them. And that
Mm.
is really tragic because they've left the relationship behind, but they're still really not emotionally separated yet. And then that's a really awful place to be, very sad and despairing. So that it's really important to go through the healing process if you have left physically but still haven't left emotionally.
I agree. I definitely agree, especially in that type of situation too. So, Shannon, I have one final question for you. I know you've been giving like some excellent advice throughout the episode, but do you have any more advice or like words of encouragement for someone who is struggling either in a toxic relationship or someone who's struggling to avoid a toxic relationship?
I think, tuning into the wisdom that is from inside, I think is really, really important. And not undermining yourself with the placating and people pleasing behaviors that we've all been strongly encouraged to do over the years. But really telling the truth in love, creating boundaries, and seeing what happens, and never being attached to somebody before you really, really, really know them.
Yeah, I agree. Well, Shannon, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you,
And
Sarah.
yeah, no problem. And I will be linking all of your information in the show notes, especially a link to your book and
Thank
your
you.
YouTube channel, because I really believe you guys should check it out. And stay tuned for more empowering episodes on Rough Edges. Thank you for listening to Rough Edges. This podcast is available on Spotify, Anchor, Apple Podcast, iHeartRadio, and more. For more updates on the Rough Edges podcast, please follow on Instagram at rough.edges.podcast. You can also visit the official podcast website at www.roughedgespodcast.com. If you have any questions or further suggestions for how this podcast can grow, please email at rough.edges.podcast@gmail.com. Thanks for listening and have a wonderful day.